His dog refused to move because the abandoned cabins above them were hiding something that was still watching. At the edge of a silent ridge in the Bitterroot Mountains, a homeless Navy SEAL named Caleb Ward followed his German shepherd, Ghost, toward 3 abandoned cabins no map should have shown. The wind carried no voices, no signs of life, only the feeling that someone had been there and maybe never left. What they were about to find would change everything. Comment 1 if you'd follow the dog, or 0 if you'd turn back, and tell us where you're watching from. The wind came hard across the Bitterroot Ridge, cutting clean through layers of worn fabric and biting at exposed skin like it had something personal to prove. Caleb Ward leaned into it without thinking, his body adjusting the way it had been trained to, small shifts of balance, controlled breathing, steady pace. The mountain didn't care who you were, and Caleb had long since stopped expecting anything different from the world. Behind him, a pair of deep paw prints followed his own in the thin dusting of snow. Silent, precise, always just slightly offset from his path. Ghost. The German shepherd moved like a shadow that had learned discipline. No wasted motion, no unnecessary sound. His coat was thick and dark, his posture alert but calm, every sense tuned to the environment in a way no human could match. Caleb didn't look back to check on him. He never had to. They had been moving for hours, climbing out of the lower tree line into open rock and wind. The last signs of a trail had disappeared miles ago. No markers, no footprints, no voices, just the mountain, stretching out in every direction, indifferent and endless. That was why Caleb came here. Out here, nothing asked questions, nothing expected answers. He adjusted the strap of his pack, feeling the familiar weight settle against his shoulders. It wasn't much. Some food, a small medical kit, extra layers, but it was enough. Enough to get through another night. Enough to keep moving. Always moving. The ridge ahead narrowed into a jagged spine of rock, rising just high enough to break the horizon. Caleb pushed toward it, boots crunching lightly against gravel and frozen ground. The air smelled clean, cold, honest. When he reached the top, he stopped. Not because he was tired, because something wasn't right. At first, it didn't make sense. The shape didn't belong. His eyes scanned the far side of the ridge, adjusting to the shifting light as clouds moved overhead. And then he saw them. 3 cabins. Small, wooden, darkened by time and weather. They clung to the side of a cliff like they had grown there, pressed into a narrow stone ledge that dropped away into nothing. No trail led to them. No road. No reason. Caleb didn't move for a moment. He just stood there, staring. Cabins didn't end up in places like that by accident. Especially not like these. They weren't collapsed. They weren't scattered. They were positioned, deliberate, built by hands that knew what they were doing. A slow breath moved through his chest. Hell of a place, he muttered under his breath. The wind shifted, carrying a low whistle across the rocks. Somewhere below, unseen, the mountain dropped into a deep valley. But up here, there was only silence. Too much silence. Caleb took a step forward. That was when Ghost stopped. The change was immediate. One moment the dog was moving, fluid and controlled. The next, still, locked. Caleb didn't hear it at first. He felt it. That subtle shift in presence, the absence of movement behind him. He turned his head slightly. Ghost stood 10 feet back, body rigid. His ears were forward, eyes fixed on the cabins. A low, almost inaudible growl rolled in his chest. Not aggressive, not panicked, but steady horning. Caleb's muscles tightened instinctively. "What is it?" he said quietly. Ghost didn't look at him, didn't blink, didn't move. Just stared. Caleb followed the dog's line of sight back to the cabins. Nothing moved. No smoke. No flicker of light. No sound. Still, something about the scene shifted. The hairs along the back of his neck rose, not from fear, but from recognition. That feeling, the same one that used to hit just before something went wrong. Before a door opened too fast. Before a street went quiet. Before a mission changed. Caleb exhaled slowly, forcing his breathing into control. "It's just old wood," he said, more to himself than to the dog. "Been here a long time." Ghost didn't respond, didn't relax. Caleb took another step forward. Ghost's growl deepened, not louder, just heavier. Caleb stopped. The wind pushed harder now, tugging at his jacket, rattling loose gravel along the ridge. He shifted his weight, scanning again. Angles, shadows, entry points. Nothing obvious. And that was the problem. Out here, everything made sense. Rock was rock. Ice was ice. Risk was visible. But those cabins, they didn't fit. Caleb lowered his pack slightly, adjusting the straps, buying himself time to think. His eyes moved slowly across the cliff face, tracing possible approaches. There, just to the left. A narrow cut in the rock, barely visible. Too clean to be natural. He narrowed his eyes. Footing. Maybe. He glanced back at Ghost. The dog hadn't moved. Still locked on target. Still refusing to step forward. That wasn't fear. That was decision. Caleb felt a quiet shift inside his chest, a line being drawn. In the past, he might have pushed forward anyway, trusted training over instinct, logic over feeling. But Ghost wasn't logic. Ghost was the part of him that never lied, the part that saw what he couldn't. Caleb stepped back. Just one step. Ghost's growl eased, slightly. Not gone, but different. Caleb let out a slow breath. "All right," he said quietly. "We do it your way." The words hung in the air, carried off by the wind. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Ghost blinked. The tension in his body shifted, not gone, but redirected. His head tilted slightly, and he stepped forward, not toward the cabins directly, but at an angle. Off the obvious path. Caleb watched him go, then followed. Careful, measured, every step deliberate. Behind them, the ridge faded into silence again. Ahead, the cabins waited, and whatever was inside them, Ghost had already decided it wasn't safe. Caleb just didn't know why yet, but he was going to find out. Ghost moved ahead with quiet certainty, choosing a path that didn't look like a path at all. Just a slight shift in the angle of rock, a faint pattern in the way loose gravel settled between cracks. Caleb followed without question, placing each step exactly where the dog had stepped before him. That trust hadn't come easy. It had been built in rooms that smelled like antiseptic and silence, in places where men sat with their backs against walls, staring at nothing, trying to remember how to exist without the noise. Caleb hadn't planned on ending up there. Years earlier, he had been the kind of man who never hesitated, a team leader, a decision maker, someone others looked to when things got complicated. He had known exactly where to stand, exactly when to move, exactly how to act. Until the night everything went wrong. The memory didn't come all at once. It never did. It slipped in like cold air through a cracked door, quiet, unwelcome, impossible to ignore. A narrow street. A door that opened too fast. A sound that didn't belong. Caleb blinked hard, forcing the image away before it could fully form. His breathing had already shifted, shorter, tighter. Ghost noticed immediately. The dog slowed, glancing back just long enough to check Caleb's posture. No panic yet, no collapse, just tension building beneath the surface. Caleb exhaled slowly through his nose, steadying himself the way he had been taught after everything fell apart. In, 2, 3, out. His voice was low, controlled, not a command, a reminder. Ghost continued forward, but closer now, just within reach. That had been the first thing they taught him at the recovery center. Don't fight it, the therapist had said. Let the dog work. At first, Caleb had hated that. He didn't need help. He didn't need someone, or something, watching him, reading him, stepping into his space without permission. But Ghost hadn't asked for permission. The first time it happened, Caleb had been sitting alone, staring at a wall he couldn't see through. His hands had been shaking, though he didn't remember when it started. Ghost had walked up quietly, then pressed his body against Caleb's side. Firm, steady, unmoving, not comfort. Pressure. Grounding. Caleb had tried to push him away at first. Reflex, pride, instinct. Ghost didn't move, didn't growl, didn't resist, just stayed there. And slowly, the shaking stopped. That was when Caleb understood. The dog wasn't there to replace anything. He was there to keep Caleb from slipping too far away. The wind cut across the ridge again, pulling Caleb back into the present. He adjusted his grip on the rock beside him, boots finding stable ground as the terrain grew sharper, more exposed. Below them, the mountain dropped away into a wide, empty valley. No roads, no houses, just distance. That was another reason he stayed out here. No reminders, no questions, no one asking what happened. The official version had been simple, clean, mission compromised, casualties sustained. Words that didn't carry weight unless you knew the names behind them. Caleb knew every name, knew the sound of their voices, the way they moved, the way they trusted him to make the right call. He had made a call that night, and it hadn't been right. The military had done what it always did. Reports, reviews, quiet reassignment, then discharge. Honorable, they said. The word felt hollow. Caleb stepped over a narrow gap in the rock, landing lightly on the other side. Ghost was already there, waiting, watching him with that steady, unreadable gaze. Still here, Caleb muttered. Ghost blinked once. That was enough. After the discharge, there hadn't been much left. No home, no family waiting, no place that felt like it belonged to him anymore. The city had been the worst part. Too many people, too much noise, too many things that didn't make sense. Out there, every movement meant something. Every sound had a reason. In the city, everything felt off. A glance that lasted too long. A voice that shifted in tone. A door that closed just a second too fast. It wore him down faster than any mission ever had. So he left. Took what he had, packed light, and moved toward the only place that still felt honest. The mountains didn't pretend. If you made a mistake out here, you paid for it immediately. No confusion, no second guessing. Just cause and effect. That clarity had become something he depended on. Ghost stopped again. This time not from warning, from decision. He turned slightly, angling toward a narrow stretch of rock that curved along the cliff face. It was barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Caleb crouched slightly, studying it. Not the obvious way, he said under his breath. Ghost flicked his ears. No argument. Caleb nodded once and followed. The path was tighter now, the rock colder under his hands as he used them for balance. Each step had to be placed carefully, weight distributed, center of gravity controlled. He moved the way he had been trained, but there was something different about it now. Before, he had moved like this because he trusted his own judgment. Now, he moved like this because he trusted ghosts. That shift wasn't small. It was everything. The wind dropped suddenly as they curved closer to the cliff face, the rock shielding them from the worst of it. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. Caleb paused, listening. Nothing. No birds. No distant movement. No shifting stone. Just stillness. Too still. He felt it again, that quiet pressure at the back of his mind. The same one that had stopped him on the ridge. Ghost's body tensed slightly. Not fear. Awareness. Caleb's eyes lifted toward the cabins again. Closer now. More defined. And somehow, more wrong. He shifted his stance, scanning the angles, the shadows, the space between the structures. "Who built you?" he whispered. The question disappeared into the rock. No answer came back. Only the slow, steady sound of his own breathing. And the quiet certainty that whatever waited ahead, it had been waiting a long time. And it hadn't been waiting by accident. Caleb stayed low against the rock, one hand braced against the cold surface as he studied the ledge ahead. The three cabins were no longer distant shapes. Now they had edges, texture, detail, enough to confirm what his instincts had already begun to tell him. This wasn't random. Every line of the structures suggested intention. The ledge they sat on wasn't wide, 20 feet at most, maybe less in places where the rock curved inward. To the right, The mountain dropped into open air, a sheer fall that disappeared into the valley below. To the left, the cliff face rose like a wall, solid and unbroken. No easy approach, no natural reason to build here. Caleb narrowed his eyes. "Someone chose this," he said quietly. Ghost stood just ahead of him, body angled toward the cabins, ears forward. No growl now, no immediate warning, but the dog hadn't relaxed either. He was reading. The same way Caleb was. Caleb shifted his gaze to the edges of the ledge, tracing possible access points. At first, it looked impossible, just a strip of rock too narrow for consistent travel. Then he saw it. A faint line along the cliff face, not carved, not obvious, but worn. Used. He moved a few steps forward, testing each foothold before committing his weight. The gravel shifted slightly beneath his boots, but the underlying rock held firm. Ghost moved ahead again, stepping precisely along that same invisible line. Caleb followed, slower now, more deliberate. As they closed the distance, more details emerged. Near a narrow bend in the ledge, Caleb spotted the first clear sign. A metal ring embedded into the stone. Half rusted, weathered, but still intact. He crouched beside it, brushing away a thin layer of dust with his fingers. The metal beneath was smooth in places, not from age but from friction. Repeated use. A rope had been tied here, more than once. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "Not abandoned," he murmured. Ghost shifted his weight, glancing briefly toward the cabins, then back at Caleb. Waiting. Caleb rose slowly, scanning ahead again. A few feet farther, another detail. Stacked stones. Not random, not decorative. Placed. Each one positioned in a way that made no sense unless you knew what they were for. Foot placement. Guidance. A path hidden in plain sight. Caleb's mind began assembling the pattern automatically, the way it always had. Approach route. Stability points. Fallback positions. Whoever had built this had planned it, and they had expected to use it regularly. The wind shifted again, weaker now as the cliff shielded them. The silence deepened. Caleb stepped forward, placing his boot exactly where Ghost had placed his paw seconds before. The stone beneath him held firm. Another step, then another. Each movement controlled, measured. He could feel it now, that quiet pressure building again in his chest. Not fear, not exactly. Awareness. The kind that came when something didn't line up. He paused and looked back the way they had come. The ridge was barely visible now, just a jagged outline against the sky. No one else up here. No movement. No sound. Still, it felt wrong to assume they were alone. He turned back toward the cabins. Closer now. Close enough to see the wood grain on the nearest structure, darkened by years of exposure, but not rotted, not collapsing, maintained. That was the part that didn't fit. Out here, wood didn't last like that without care. The first cabin stood slightly forward on the ledge, its front facing outward toward the valley. The second was tucked closer to the cliff, partially shielded by a natural curve in the rock. The third sat farther back, almost hidden behind a jutting section of stone. Positioned. Layered. Defensive, Caleb felt a slow shift in his posture. Not just curiosity anymore. Assessment. Ghost stopped again. This time, he lowered his head slightly, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. No bark, no growl, just quiet calculation. Caleb followed the dog's gaze to the ground. There, a faint mark. At first, it looked like nothing, just a darker patch of dust on the rock. But as he crouched closer, the shape became clearer. A boot print, worn at the edges, but still visible. Caleb's pulse slowed, not from calm, but from focus. "How old?" he whispered. He ran his fingers lightly over the impression. The edges had softened, but not completely. Not decades old. Not recent either. Somewhere in between. Ghost shifted beside him, tail still, posture alert. Caleb straightened slowly, scanning again. More signs appeared once he knew what to look for. A faint scrape along the rock wall. A section of stone slightly smoother than the rest. Small things. But together, they told a story. People had been here, moved here, worked here, and not that long ago. Caleb's breathing settled into a steady rhythm. 2, 3, out. He stepped forward again. The ledge widened slightly as they approached the first cabin, enough to stand without leaning into the cliff. The ground here was different. Less loose gravel, more compacted dust. Traveled. Repeatedly. Ghost moved ahead, slower now, his head low, scanning not just the cabin, but the spaces between them. The gaps, the shadows, the places someone could be. Caleb felt it too. That subtle shift in awareness, like stepping into a room where something had already happened. The door of the first cabin came into full view closed, slightly uneven on its hinges, but still intact. No visible lock, no obvious damage. Caleb stopped a few feet away. He didn't reach for the door. Not yet. Instead, he turned his head slightly, listening. The mountain answered with silence. No movement inside. No shifting boards. No breath. Still, the silence felt deliberate. Ghost stepped closer to the cabin, then paused again. Not at the door. To the side. His body angled toward the wall, ears forward, focus sharp, not reacting to the structure, reacting to something within it. Caleb's eyes followed. The wall looked like any other, weathered wood, darkened by time. But Ghost wasn't guessing. He never guessed. Caleb moved slowly to the side of the cabin, keeping one hand free, his posture balanced, ready to react if needed. He placed his palm lightly against the wood. Cold. Solid. Still. He knocked once. The sound was dull, muted. He knocked again, slightly lower. A different tone. Not hollow, but not completely solid either. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Ghost tapped the wall once with his paw, deliberate, then stepped back, watching Caleb. Waiting. Caleb felt that same quiet line inside him tighten. Not fear. Recognition. Something here didn't belong, and whatever it was, Ghost had found it first. Caleb drew in a slow breath, steadying himself. Then he reached for the edge of the wall, fingers searching for anything out of place. Because now he understood one thing clearly. These cabins weren't just built to survive the mountain. They were built to hide something, and he had just stepped into the middle of it. Caleb didn't move right away. His hand stayed pressed against the cabin wall, fingers spread slightly, as if the wood might shift under his touch. The cold seeped through his skin, grounding him, keeping him anchored in the present. Ghost waited, still, focused, not impatient, not anxious, certain. Caleb exhaled slowly. In, 2, 3, out. The rhythm steadied him, pulled him back from the edge of instinct that told him to force the door, clear the structure, take control. That instinct had kept him alive once, but this wasn't a combat zone, and Ghost wasn't reacting like it was one. Caleb stepped back from the wall and looked down at the ledge again. "Show me," he said quietly. Ghost moved immediately. Not toward the door, not toward the opening, but along the side of the cabin, hugging the cliff face where the rock narrowed again into a tight, uneven strip. Caleb followed. The shift was subtle but important. He wasn't leading anymore. He was following. The path curved behind the first cabin, where the ledge tightened and dipped slightly. The rock here was darker, smoother in places where boots, or paws, had worn it down over time. Ghost slowed, then stopped. His head lowered, nose close to the ground, tracing a faint line Caleb hadn't noticed before. A path within a path, hidden even from someone trained to see them. Caleb crouched beside him, eyes scanning the same area. At first, nothing. Then, there, a shallow groove between two sections of rock, just wide enough for careful footing. Not natural, not random. Designed. Caleb let out a quiet breath. "Someone didn't want this to be found," he said. Ghost flicked his ears but didn't look up. Instead, he stepped forward onto the narrow groove, placing each paw with precision. Caleb rose and followed, matching the dog's movements exactly. The cliff pressed close on his left now, the rock cool and unyielding against his shoulder. To his right, the drop fell away into open air, the valley far below blurred by distance. Every step mattered. Every shift of weight had consequences. Ghost moved like he had done this before. Not here, not this exact place, but in environments like it. Tight, dangerous, unforgiving. Caleb trusted that, more than he trusted himself. Halfway along the back edge of the cabin, Ghost stopped again. This time his posture changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. His body lowered slightly. His stance widened. Not aggressive. Protective. Caleb felt it immediately. His own muscles tightened in response, his senses sharpening. "What is it?" he whispered. Ghost didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply turned his head slightly, just enough to indicate something ahead. Caleb followed the motion. The second cabin came into view from this angle, closer to the cliff, more sheltered, its door partially obscured by shadow. But that wasn't what caught his attention. It was the space between the first and second cabins. A narrow gap, barely wide enough for a person to pass through, and darker than it should have been. Caleb's breathing slowed again, controlled, deliberate. He shifted his stance, adjusting his footing to face that gap directly. From here, the layout made more sense. The cabins weren't just placed for shelter. They were positioned to control movement, to limit access, to create blind spots. Caleb felt a familiar recognition settle in his chest. This was tactical. Not military, at least not in a formal sense, but built by someone who understood positioning. Angles. Visibility. Ghost stepped forward again, moving toward the gap. Caleb followed, one hand brushing lightly against the rock for balance. The air felt different here, colder, stiller. The wind didn't reach this section the same way, blocked by the structure and the cliff. Sound didn't travel well either. If someone were inside, Caleb wouldn't hear them until it was too late. He stopped just short of the gap. Ghost stood at the entrance, body angled slightly sideways, blocking part of the opening. A silent signal. Wait. Caleb nodded once, even though the dog wasn't looking at him. He crouched again, lowering his profile, and leaned just enough to look into the space without exposing himself fully. Dark, but not empty. The ground inside the gap was different, more compacted, smoother, used. A faint scrape marked one side of the wall, as if something had been moved through here repeatedly. Not dragged, carried. Caleb's mind worked through possibilities. Storage, access point, hidden entry. He shifted slightly, adjusting his angle. That's when he saw it. A second metal ring, smaller than the first, positioned lower, closer to the ground. This one wasn't just for climbing. It was for securing something, or someone. Caleb felt a flicker of tension move through his chest. Not just shelter, he murmured. Ghost's ears twitched. The dog stepped forward one pace into the gap, then stopped again, waiting. Caleb moved with him, slow, controlled. Inside the narrow space, the temperature dropped slightly, the rock holding the cold longer than the open ledge. The light dimmed, shadows stretching deeper along the walls. Caleb's eyes adjusted. At the far end of the gap, just beyond where the light reached, a shape. Wood. Another panel. Not part of the cabin. Set into the rock itself. Hidden. Caleb's pulse slowed again, not from calm, but from focus. Back entrance, he whispered. Ghost remained still, watching the panel, his body coiled with quiet readiness. Caleb stepped closer, one hand lifting slightly, ready to react if the panel shifted or gave way unexpectedly. He reached out, paused, listened. Nothing. No movement, no sound, just the weight of silence pressing in from all sides. He placed his hand against the hidden panel. The wood felt different from the cabin walls. Less weathered, more protected. Used more recently. Caleb's fingers traced the edge. There. A seam. Barely visible. He glanced down at Ghost. The dog met his eyes for a brief moment. Steady, unwavering, not warning him away, but not relaxing either. This wasn't over. Not even close. Caleb drew in a slow breath, Then, carefully, he pressed. The panel shifted, just slightly. But enough. Enough to confirm what he already knew. This place wasn't abandoned. It was layered. Hidden. And whatever it was hiding, he was about to find it. Because now there was no turning back. And Ghost had already chosen the path forward. The panel gave way with a slow, quiet shift, the wood sliding inward just enough to create a narrow opening. Caleb froze immediately, every muscle locking into place, listening for any reaction from within. Nothing. No sudden movement. No change in air. No sound except the faint scrape of wood settling back against stone. Ghost stepped forward first. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Deliberate. His body lowered slightly as he moved through the opening, nose testing the air before his paws crossed the threshold. Caleb followed half a second behind, slipping inside and turning just enough to keep the entrance in his peripheral vision. The space beyond wasn't what he expected. It wasn't a hidden tunnel or a cramped storage space. It was a room all structured, intact. The first thing Caleb noticed was the air. Dry. Not stale. That alone was enough to shift something in his chest. Abandoned places didn't feel like this. They carried the weight of neglect, rot, moisture, decay. This place didn't. This place felt held together, maintained. He let his eyes adjust to the dim light filtering in through a narrow slit in the wall. It wasn't a window in the traditional sense, more like a viewing cut, angled outward toward the valley below. Controlled visibility. Caleb stepped forward slowly, boots barely making a sound on the wooden floor. The boards creaked once under his weight, then settled. Ghost moved deeper into the room, scanning, his head low, ears flicking toward every corner. No immediate threat, but not clear either. Caleb's gaze moved across the interior. A bed against the far wall, simple, narrow, but neatly made. The blanket folded with precision, not tossed or abandoned. A small table near the viewing slit, its surface worn but clean. Tools arranged along the wall, hammer, small saw, lengths of rope coiled tightly. Everything had a place. Everything was in its place. Caleb felt a slow tightening in his chest. "This isn't abandoned," he said quietly. The words didn't echo. They just settled into the room. Ghost paused near the center, then turned his head toward Caleb, watching him, not for instruction, but for confirmation. Caleb nodded once. "I see it." He stepped toward the table, his movements controlled, careful not to disturb anything unnecessarily. The surface held a few objects. A metal cup. Empty. A folded cloth. Clean, or at least not recently used, and a small stack of thin, flat stones arranged in a line. Markers. Caleb didn't touch them. Not yet. Instead, he moved to the bed. The blanket was worn, edges frayed slightly, but still intact. He reached out, brushing his fingers lightly across the surface. Cold, but not brittle. Not decayed at some point, not recently, but not long enough ago to be forgotten by the material itself. He straightened slowly, his eyes moving to the walls again. No pictures, no personal items, no names, nothing that told a story directly. only function, only purpose. Ghost shifted again, drawing Caleb's attention. The dog had moved to the far wall, near where the light from the slit angled across the floor. He wasn't looking outside. He was looking at the wall itself. Caleb followed, stepping carefully across the room. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Ghost didn't respond with sound. He stepped closer to the wall and lifted one paw, then tapped. Once. A soft, controlled motion. Caleb stopped a few feet away, watching. Ghost lowered his paw, then stepped back slightly, giving Caleb space. Not random. Never random. Caleb crouched slowly, bringing himself level with the section of wall Ghost had indicated. At first glance, it looked no different from the rest. Same wood, same grain, same weathering. But the longer he looked, the more the details began to separate. A seam thin, almost invisible, running vertically between two boards. Caleb leaned closer, his fingers hovering just above the surface. "This again," he murmured. His mind moved quickly, connecting the pattern. Hidden entrance outside. Hidden structure inside. Now, hidden compartment. He placed his hand lightly against the seam. The wood didn't shift immediately. He adjusted his grip, applying a slight pressure along the edge. Nothing. He paused, thinking, then moved his hand lower. Pressed again. This time, a faint give. Not loose. Controlled. Deliberate. Caleb's pulse slowed, his focus narrowing. He slid his fingers along the seam, searching for the point of movement. Found it pressed. The board shifted inward with a soft, muted sound. Ghost's posture tightened instantly, not alarmed. Ready. Caleb eased the panel open, careful not to force it. Behind it, darkness. A narrow compartment, sealed from the rest of the room. He reached inside slowly, his hand brushing against cloth. Wrapped, protected. He pulled it out carefully, bringing it into the light. A bundle. Heavy. More than it looked. He set it on the table, unwrapping the outer layer with controlled movements. The cloth came away easily. Inside, leather. Worn. Cracked at the edges, but intact. A book. Thick. Solid. Caleb didn't touch it right away. He just stood there looking at it. Ghost moved closer, his nose hovering just above the surface, then pulling back slightly. Not reacting with fear, not reacting with aggression. Just acknowledging it. Caleb placed one hand on the table, grounding himself. In, 2, 3, out. His voice was barely above a whisper. He reached for the book. The leather felt cool under his fingers. Real. Weighty. Like it carried more than just paper. He lifted it slowly, feeling the balance shift in his hand. Not a journal someone carried casually. Something meant to last. Something meant to be kept. Caleb sat down on the edge of the bench beside the table, the wood creaking softly under his weight. Ghost stayed close, positioning himself between Caleb and the doorway without being told. Always the same, always watching. Caleb rested the book on the table in front of him. His fingers lingered on the cover. No title, no name, no marking to explain what it was. Just worn leather and the faint impression of something that had once been pressed into it, now long faded. Caleb drew in one more slow breath, then opened it. The pages inside were filled, not scattered, not chaotic, precise. Neat lines of handwriting stretched across the paper, organized, controlled, deliberate. The first entry was simple. A date, weather conditions, wind direction, temperature. Caleb frowned slightly. He turned the page. Another entry. Similar structure, more detail. He flipped again, and again. Page after page, consistent, methodical. This wasn't a personal diary. This was a record. Ghost shifted slightly beside him, his attention moving between the book and the doorway. Caleb's eyes moved faster now, scanning the entries, patterns forming, details repeating, something building beneath the surface. Then, a change. A name. Written cleanly, without emphasis. Followed by a short description. Clothing, movement, direction. Caleb's breathing tightened. He turned the page. Another name. Another description. Another observation. His grip on the edge of the table hardened slightly. This isn't just tracking weather, he murmured. Ghost's ears flicked. Caleb turned another page, and another. The pattern became clearer. People. Observed, recorded, tracked. Caleb leaned back slightly, his mind racing through possibilities. Surveillance, but not official, not structured in any way he recognized. No codes, no abbreviations he had seen in the military. Just attention. Focused, relentless. He stared down at the open page. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Like the walls had shifted inward without moving. Ghost let out a low breath. Not a growl. Not a warning. Just presence. Caleb looked at the book again, then toward the narrow slit in the wall. The one that looked out over the valley. The one that gave a perfect view of the trails below. And suddenly, it all made sense. This wasn't just a cabin. It was a vantage point. A place to watch. A place to observe. A place to record. Caleb's jaw tightened. Whoever built this, he said quietly. They weren't hiding from the mountain. His eyes returned to the pages. They were watching people. And whatever that meant, he was already too deep to walk away. Caleb sat motionless for a moment, the journal open in front of him, his eyes locked on the lines of writing as if they might rearrange themselves into something less unsettling. They didn't. The structure remained the same. Date. Conditions. Movement. Names. Always names. He turned another page, slower this time. The handwriting didn't change. Whoever had written this, whoever had kept this record, had done so with discipline. Each line was straight, each word placed carefully, like it mattered that nothing be misread. Caleb recognized that kind of control. It wasn't casual. It was trained. Ghost shifted slightly beside him, the dog's presence steady, grounding. His body pressed lightly against Caleb's leg, just enough to remind him where he was. Here. Now. Caleb let out a quiet breath and leaned forward again. The entries began to stretch across weeks, then months. Different names, different descriptions. Male, mid-30s, red jacket, moving too fast on upper trail. Two hikers, couple arguing near river bend, slowed pace. Group of 4, inexperienced, carrying insufficient gear. Caleb's jaw tightened. This wasn't random observation. This was assessment. Whoever had written this wasn't just watching. They were evaluating. He turned another page, and then he stopped. A short entry, written slightly darker than the others. Lone hiker. Entered North Ridge during high wind. Hesitated twice. Turned back after marker placement. Caleb frowned. Marker placement? He murmured. Ghost's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, but the dog didn't move. Caleb flipped back a page, then forward again, looking for context. There it was. Another entry, earlier. Loose stones rearranged at fork, redirected path away from unstable section. Caleb leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing. Redirected. He turned another page. Water cache placed near East Pass. Subject appeared dehydrated, continued safely. Caleb's breathing slowed, but not from calm, from focus. This wasn't surveillance, not in the way he had first thought. He turned another page. Rope left at narrow ledge. Subject used it to descend. No visual contact. Caleb's grip tightened on the edge of the table. They're helping, he said quietly. Ghost shifted again, lifting his head slightly. Caleb stared down at the journal. Every entry was the same. Observation, assessment, intervention, but never direct contact. Never a name attached to the writer. Never a claim of responsibility. Just action. Invisible, controlled, deliberate. He turned another page, and another. The pattern held. Dozens of entries. Small actions. Subtle changes. Each one placed just right. Each one making a difference. Without being seen. Caleb felt something shift in his chest. A slow, unexpected weight. Respect. But it didn't erase the tension. Because there was still something wrong. He flipped forward again, faster now, looking for the edge, the part that didn't fit. He found it. A single line, short, clean, male, early 40s, entered Upper Ridge, did not return. Caleb's eyes stopped moving. He read it again, then again. The words didn't change. No explanation, no detail, just a fact. Did not return. Ghost let out a low breath, his body pressing slightly harder against Caleb's leg. Caleb's jaw tightened. He turned the page. Another entry. Different name. Different date. Same ending. Did not return. A third. A fourth. Each one spaced out. Not frequent, but consistent. Caleb felt the room tighten again. the walls closing in without moving. They couldn't save everyone, he said quietly. Ghost didn't respond, but his presence didn't waver. Caleb leaned forward again, his eyes scanning the pages more carefully now. There were marks beside some entries. Small symbols, circles, lines, nothing obvious, but repeated, meaning something. He traced one lightly with his finger, then looked at the corresponding entry. Group redirected, safe descent. He flipped back, found another mark. Subject warned indirectly, changed course. Caleb nodded slowly. Success markers, he murmured. Then he found another. A line drawn through the margin. Next to an entry that ended with, did not return. Caleb exhaled slowly. Failures, he said. The word sat heavy in the air. Ghost shifted again, his head turning slightly toward the door. Not reacting, just checking. Caleb noticed. His own instincts flared again, sharp and immediate. He turned his head, scanning the doorway, the narrow slit of light, the shadows beyond. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. Still, the feeling didn't go away. That quiet pressure, that sense of being, not alone. He turned back to the journal, flipped forward. Faster now. Pages turning under his fingers. The entries became more frequent, more detailed, more urgent. Weather worsening. Conditions shifting. More interventions. More risk. Then, another change. The handwriting. Subtle, but different. The letters slightly tighter. The spacing less even. Caleb froze, then flipped back. Compared. There it was. A second hand. Another person. Maybe more. This wasn't one guy, he said quietly. Ghost's ears lifted slightly. Caleb nodded to himself. A group. He turned forward again, looking for confirmation. Found it. A single word buried in an entry. We small. Almost missed. But there, Caleb sat back slowly, the realization settling into place. This was a team. Not military, not official, but organized, disciplined, committed. He looked around the room again. The bed, the tools, the layout. Everything supported it. This wasn't a shelter. It was an outpost. A system, built to watch, built to help, built to stay hidden. Ghost shifted again, stepping slightly in front of Caleb this time, his body angled toward the door. Protective. Caleb felt it instantly. The tension snapped back into place. He closed the journal halfway, his hand resting on the cover. "What is it?" he whispered. Ghost didn't growl, didn't bark. But his body was locked now. Focused. Listening. Caleb followed his gaze to the doorway. The light hadn't changed. The shadows hadn't moved. But something felt different. The air. The silence. He stood slowly, the bench creaking under him. The journal still in his hand. His eyes moved across the room, then back to the door. "Someone's been here," he said quietly. Not a guess. Not a theory. A possibility that had just become real. Ghost took one step forward, blocking the direct line to Caleb. Ready. Caleb's grip tightened on the journal. His mind moved fast now. If this place had been used, if the entries went this far, then the timeline mattered, and he hadn't reached the end yet. He looked back down at the open pages, then flipped forward, toward the most recent entries. Because whatever answers were coming, they weren't behind him, they were ahead. And something told him he wasn't going to like what he found. Caleb didn't sit back down. He stayed on his feet, the journal open in his hands, his body angled slightly toward the doorway while his eyes scanned the last section of entries. Every instinct he had was split, half on the pages, half on the room around him. Ghost stood between him and the door now, not tense enough to attack, but not relaxed enough to ignore. Watching. Caleb flipped forward. The paper near the end felt different, less worn, less aged. His pulse slowed, not from calm, but from the kind of focus that came just before something broke. He found the most recent entry. The handwriting was tighter, sharper, as if the person writing had less time or less strength. Date. Recent. Too recent. Caleb's jaw tightened. No way, he whispered. He leaned closer, reading carefully. Male. Mid-30s. Military posture. Controlled pace. Avoids open exposure. Caleb's breathing stopped. For a second, the words didn't connect. Then they did, every detail aligned. He turned the page, his fingers moving faster now. Another entry. Dog. German Shepherd. Highly trained. Responds to nonverbal cues. Protective positioning. Ghost shifted slightly in front of him. As if he understood, Caleb's throat tightened. He read the next line. Subject aware of environment. Possibly former military. Observing him from distance. The room went silent. Not quiet, silent. Like everything had been pulled out of it. Caleb didn't move, didn't blink. His mind ran through the possibilities. Timeline. Distance. Angle. If this was written days ago, then someone had been here, watching him, tracking him, writing about him. Ghost let out a low, controlled growl. Not loud, but deep. Caleb's body reacted instantly. His posture shifted, shoulders tightening, weight redistributing, ready for movement. Easy, he whispered. Ghost didn't take his eyes off the door. Caleb closed the journal slowly, his hand pressing against the cover as if it might steady something inside him. His heart rate stayed controlled. That part of him, the trained part, was still intact. But underneath it, something else moved. Not fear, not panic. Something colder. Calculation. He stepped closer to the slit in the wall, angling his body just enough to look out without exposing himself fully. The valley stretched below. Wide. Empty. Peaceful. Too peaceful. Tiny figures moved along the distant trail, hikers, unaware of anything above them. No movement near the cabins. No sign of anyone watching. But that didn't mean anything. If someone had written those entries, they knew how to stay unseen. Caleb stepped back. His eyes moved quickly through the room again, this time with a different lens. Not just observing. Clearing. Angles. Blind spots. Entry points. Nothing obvious, which made it worse. Ghost took one slow step forward, then stopped again. His body shifted slightly. Weight forward. Ready. Listening. Caleb followed his gaze to the doorway. Still nothing. But the air felt heavier now. Charged. Like something had changed the moment he opened that last page. They were here, Caleb said quietly. Not a question. Not a theory. A fact. Ghost's growl deepened for a second, then faded back into silence. Caleb opened the journal again, flipping back to the entry. Reading it slower this time, looking for more. There. A final line written slightly smaller than the rest. Subject approached outer ridge. Did not engage. Continued observation. Caleb's fingers tightened on the page. They chose not to make contact, he said. Ghost's ears flicked. Caleb's mind moved quickly. If they had seen him, if they had tracked him, then they had made a decision. To stay hidden. To watch. The same way they had watched everyone else. But why? He turned the page. Blank. Another. Blank. That was it. No follow-up. No conclusion. Just nothing. Caleb stared at the empty pages for a long moment. They stopped writing, he murmured. Or they couldn't. The thought settled heavily in his chest. Ghost shifted again, stepping closer to Caleb now, his body brushing against him. Not just protection. Contact. Caleb felt it immediately. The tension. The edge. His breathing had shortened again. Barely noticeable. But Ghost noticed. Always. The dog pressed slightly harder into Caleb's side. Firm. Steady. Grounding. Caleb closed his eyes for a second. In. 2. 3. He exhaled slowly. Out. The pressure in his chest eased. Not gone, but controlled. He opened his eyes again. Focused. Present. Ghost stepped back slightly, but stayed close. Always within reach. Caleb looked down at the journal one more time, then around the room, then toward the door. They were watching everyone, he said quietly. And then they watched me. The weight of that settled deeper than anything else he had read. Because it meant one thing. This place wasn't just history. It wasn't just a system that used to exist. It had been active. Recently. And now, it was silent. Too silent. Caleb moved toward the door slowly, each step controlled, his senses stretched outward. Ghost moved with him, matching his pace, his focus locked on the space beyond. Caleb stopped at the threshold, listened. Nothing. Still nothing. But now, that nothing felt louder than any sound. He stepped just outside, scanning the ledge, the gaps between cabins, the edges of the cliff. Empty. But not safe. He turned back inside, grabbing the journal again. If someone had been here recently, if they had been watching him, then the rest of the story wasn't in the past. It was unfinished. And whatever happened next was going to involve him. Because now he wasn't just a hiker who found something strange. He was part of the record. And somewhere, someone had already written his name, even if he hadn't seen it yet. Caleb stood just outside the cabin, the journal held firmly in his hand, the cold wind returning as he stepped out from the sheltered gap. It hit his face sharp and clean, but it didn't clear his thoughts. If anything, it sharpened them. Ghost moved ahead first, sweeping the ledge with controlled precision, his head turning in small increments, scanning every angle. His tail stayed low, still, not fearful, but measured. Working. Caleb followed, his boots finding the same narrow path they had taken in. Only now, everything looked different. The cabins weren't just structures anymore. They were positions, observation points, a system. He paused between the first and second cabins, turning slowly in place, his eyes tracing lines that hadn't been visible before. The slit in the first cabin, perfect view of the lower trail. The second cabin, angled toward a different section of the valley. The third, partially hidden, likely covering the blind spots. Layered. Overlapping. Whoever built this didn't just want to survive. They wanted to see everything. Ghost stopped near the edge of the ledge and looked down. Caleb stepped beside him. Far below, hikers moved like small, distant shapes, following the marked trail that wound along the valley floor. Bright jackets, steady pace, no awareness of anything above them. Caleb's grip tightened on the journal. They never knew, he said quietly. Ghost flicked his ears. Caleb looked back at the cabins. They were being watched, every step. The idea sat uneasily in his chest. He had felt it earlier, when he first read the entries. Surveillance, tracking, observation without consent. It had felt wrong. Still did. Caleb turned back toward the first cabin, then the second. "What were you?" he murmured under his breath. Watchers? He stepped toward the second cabin now, drawn by the same quiet pull that had brought him to the first. Ghost followed closely, his body brushing lightly against Caleb's leg once, a brief contact. "Check in," Caleb nodded slightly. "I'm good." The second cabin door hung slightly open, just enough to show darkness inside. Caleb paused at the threshold, his body angled, one hand resting lightly against the wood. He listened. Nothing. Then he pushed the door open slowly. It creaked. Not loud, but loud enough in the stillness. Ghost entered first again. Always first. The interior was different from the first cabin. Narrower. More focused. Shelves lined one wall, filled with tools, rope, wire, small containers, all arranged with the same precision. A workbench sat beneath a small window, its surface marked with years of use. Repairs, maintenance, preparation. Caleb stepped inside, his eyes moving quickly across the space. "This is where they worked," he said. Ghost moved along the edges, checking corners, then paused near the window. Caleb followed. The view from here was different. Lower, closer to a specific section of trail. A dangerous one. He could see it now, a narrow pass between two rock formations where the path dipped sharply. A bad place to make a mistake. Caleb's mind flashed back to the journal. Loose stones rearranged, redirected path, rope left, subject used it. He looked at the workbench again. The tools, the materials. They weren't just watching, he said. They were fixing things. Ghost turned his head slightly, watching Caleb now. Caleb's expression shifted. The tension that had built in his chest began to change. Not gone, but reshaped. He moved back to the journal, flipping it open again. The earlier entries felt different now. He read one slowly. Subject approaching unstable section. Marker placed. Subject adjusted route. Another, water left near pass. Subject recovered, continued. Another. Loose rock removed after storm. Caleb exhaled. They weren't controlling people, he said quietly. They were protecting them. The realization settled slowly. Heavy, not relieving, just different. Ghost's posture softened slightly. Not relaxed, but less rigid. As if the dog sensed the shift too. Caleb leaned back against the wall, the wood solid behind him. He looked down at the valley again through the small window. Those hikers. They had no idea. No idea how close they might have come to making a wrong step. No idea someone had been watching, adjusting, guiding, without ever being seen. Caleb's jaw tightened. That's one way to do it, he murmured. But something still didn't sit right. He flipped forward again, searching for the edge. The entries where things changed. He found them. Shorter notes, less detail, more symbols, and the same words appearing again. Did not return. Caleb's eyes lingered on the phrase, then moved to the surrounding entries. Subject ignored marker. Subject continued upward despite conditions. Subject not observed on return path. Caleb felt the tension rise again. They couldn't stop everyone, he said. Ghost shifted slightly, his ears flicking toward the door again. Caleb noticed. His instincts snapped back into place instantly. He closed the journal halfway, listening. Nothing. Still nothing. But now he understood the feeling. It wasn't just unease. It was exposure. This place had been built to see others, but it also meant anyone here could be seen. Caleb stepped away from the wall, moving toward the door. Ghost moved with him, stepping slightly ahead, scanning the ledge again. Caleb stopped just outside, his eyes moving across the cabins once more. First, second, third. A system, a purpose, but also a cost. He looked down at the journal again. They stayed hidden, he said, even when people got hurt. Ghost looked up at him. Caleb shook his head slightly. Not because they didn't care. He looked back at the cabins, but because they couldn't risk being seen. The line between watcher and protector blurred, and Caleb felt himself standing right on it. Because he understood both sides, the need to stay hidden, the need to act, the weight of choosing when to do either. Ghost stepped closer, pressing lightly against Caleb's leg again. Grounding. Caleb let out a slow breath. In, 2, 3, out. The tension eased, but didn't disappear. Because one question still remained. If they had done all this, if they had built this system, if they had stayed hidden for so long, then why did it end? Caleb looked toward the third cabin, the one set farther back, more protected, more hidden. And something in his chest tightened again. Whatever happened, he took a step forward. It's in there. Ghost moved ahead without hesitation. Because for him, the answer had already been decided. And Caleb knew, the deeper they went, the harder it would be to walk away. Caleb followed Ghost toward the third cabin, his steps slower now, not from hesitation, but from weight. Understanding had changed the space. What had first felt like a threat now carried something else, something heavier. The third cabin stood farther back against the cliff, partially shielded by a natural overhang, less exposed, less visible, more protected than the others. Caleb stopped a few feet from the door. This one mattered, he said quietly. Ghost didn't respond. He was already moving, nose low, tracing the edges of the structure, reading it in ways Caleb couldn't. The door creaked as Caleb pushed it open. Inside, the air felt different. Not colder, not darker, but lived in. More than the others, Caleb stepped in slowly, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. 2 beds, placed on opposite sides of the room. Both made. Both worn. A table at the center, larger than the one in the first cabin, its surface marked with deep scratches and faint indentations. A shared space. Not just survival. Living. Ghost moved carefully along the perimeter, checking corners, then paused near one of the beds. Caleb followed, his gaze drifting across the room. There were more objects here. A jacket hanging from a hook, patched, worn, but intact. A pair of boots placed neatly beside the wall. A small shelf holding a few books, their covers faded beyond recognition. No names, no pictures, no identity, just presence. Caleb felt it settle into his chest. They were real, he murmured. Ghost flicked his ears. Caleb stepped toward the table, placing the journal down gently. He opened it again. Not to the earlier entries, to the middle, to where the tone had started to change. He read slowly now, not scanning. Listening. The entries felt different here, still controlled, still precise. But something underneath them had shifted. Storm approaching earlier than expected, visibility reduced, increased risk. Subject hesitated at ridge, marker reinforced, food stores reduced, must ration. Caleb's brow tightened. They were running low, he said. Ghost moved closer, settling near his feet. Caleb turned another page. The handwriting remained steady, but the spacing had changed. Less room between lines, More written in smaller areas. Saving space. Saving resources. Even ink. Another entry. Cold worsening. 1 injured. Movement limited. Caleb's chest tightened slightly. Injured, he repeated. He flipped forward. Assisted subject near pass. Slipped during return. Minor damage. He exhaled slowly. They risked themselves, he said. Ghost shifted, resting his head briefly against Caleb's knee. Contact. Grounding. Caleb placed a hand on the dog's neck for a moment, steadying himself, then continued. The entries became more fragmented, less descriptive, more direct. Supplies low, movement reduced. Continue observation. The repetition of that phrase stood out. Continue, continue, continue. Caleb swallowed. They didn't stop, he said, even when it got harder, even when it cost more. He turned another page, and then he froze. The handwriting had changed again. Not a different person. The same hand, but weaker, less steady. The lines wavered slightly, as if the person writing had struggled to keep control. Storm severe, unable to descend. Food nearly gone. Will maintain position. Caleb's jaw tightened. They stayed, he whispered. Ghost's ears flicked. Caleb flipped forward again. The entries were shorter now. 1 line, sometimes 2. Assisted subject. No contact. Left water. Watched descent. Always the same pattern. Even now. Even here. Still helping. Caleb felt something shift deep inside him. Not tension, not fear. Something quieter, something harder to define. Respect. He turned another page and then he stopped again. The entry was different. Longer. More space between the lines. As if the writer had taken more time. Male. Alone. Entered during storm. Lost direction. Could not reach in time. Caleb's breath caught. He read it again. Then looked at the next line. Did not return. The words hit harder now. Not just as a record, but as a failure. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. He knew that feeling. Knew it in a way that went beyond understanding. Ghost pressed closer. Caleb exhaled slowly. In, 2, 3, out. The tension eased slightly. He opened his eyes again, turned the page. More entries. More losses. Spaced out. But present. Each one marked. Each one recorded. No emotion written. But all of it there, between the lines. They carried it, Caleb said quietly. All of it. Ghost didn't move, but his presence didn't change. He stayed. That was enough. Caleb turned another page, near the end now. The writing was thinner, more spaced out, as if each word took more effort. 2 remaining. Caleb froze. 2, he repeated. He flipped forward. Cold worsening. Movement limited. Continue observation. Then, alone, the word sat there, by itself. Caleb's throat tightened. "Just one left," he said. Ghost lifted his head slightly. Caleb stared at the page, tried to picture it. One person, in this place, after everything, still watching, still helping, still writing. He turned the page. The next entry was shorter than all the others. Assisted group near Lower Trail, successful. Caleb exhaled, even then, still doing it. He flipped again. The final written page. The handwriting was barely steady now, the letters thinner, fainter, but still controlled, still deliberate. Caleb leaned closer, reading carefully. "If we disappear, no one will know we tried." The words settled into the room like something alive. Caleb didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat there, staring at the page. Ghost shifted beside him, resting his head fully against Caleb's leg now. No alert, no warning, just presence. Caleb reached down, placing his hand on the dog's head. The weight of everything pressed down at once. The cabins, the system, the years, the people. They weren't hiding from people, he said quietly. They were hiding for them. Ghost's ears flicked once. Caleb looked up, his eyes moving slowly across the room again. The beds, the table, the tools. All of it made sense now. Not as a hiding place, but as a purpose, a mission, one that no one would ever see, no one would ever thank. He looked back at the journal, at the final line. They knew, he said. They knew no one would remember. The silence in the cabin felt different now. Not empty. Full. Heavy. And for the first time since he had stepped onto the ledge, Caleb didn't feel like he was being watched. He felt like he was the one doing the watching now. Standing in a place that had once held something rare, something real, something human, and the weight of it was just beginning to settle in. Caleb didn't move for a long time. The wind outside rose and fell in distant pulses, brushing against the cabin walls, slipping through unseen cracks in the wood. Inside, everything remained still, held in place by something more than structure. Ghost stayed close, his body pressed against Caleb's leg, steady and warm. Anchored. Caleb's eyes drifted back to the journal, to the last pages, to the story that didn't end the way stories were supposed to. He opened it again. Slowly. Not searching this time. Reading. Understanding. The entries near the end carried a different kind of weight, not just in what they said, but in what they didn't. Storm lasted 3 days. No descent possible. Supplies nearly depleted. Movement restricted. Continue observation. Caleb swallowed. They had been trapped. Cut off. But they hadn't left. He turned another page. The handwriting faltered slightly. Not dramatically, but enough. Subject entered upper ridge. Conditions unstable. Could not assist. A pause. Then. Did not return. Caleb exhaled slowly, his chest tightening. That phrase again. But here, it felt different. Not just a record, a failure. Ghost shifted, sensing the change in Caleb's breathing. The dog lifted his head, watching him. Caleb placed a hand on Ghost's neck, grounding himself. In, 2, 3, out. He steadied, but the weight didn't lift. He turned the page. Another entry. Attempted descent. Ice unstable. Injury sustained. Returned. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Injury, he murmured. He flipped forward, looking for follow-up. Found it. Movement limited. Pain increasing. The writing grew tighter, more compressed, as if the writer was conserving strength or time. Caleb leaned back slightly, his gaze unfocused for a moment, as the pieces began to fall into place. They didn't just lose people, he said quietly. They got hurt doing it. Ghost's ears flicked. Caleb continued reading. Left water cache near pass, nearly exposed, avoided contact. Marker placed under risk, subject redirected, even injured, even weakened. They kept going. Caleb's jaw tightened. Why? He whispered. The question hung in the air. No answer came, only the quiet presence of the room. He turned another page. The entries became shorter, more spaced out. Cold worsening. Food minimal. Continue observation. Always that phrase. Continue. Even when everything told them to stop. Caleb's fingers pressed harder into the edge of the paper. He knew that mindset. Knew it too well. The idea that stopping wasn't an option. That the mission didn't end just because it got harder, or because people got hurt, or because you were alone. His breathing shifted again. Ghost responded instantly. The dog moved closer, pressing firmly against Caleb's side. Not aggressive, not urgent. Steady. Caleb closed his eyes for a second. The memory came fast this time. Too fast. A flash, a dark hallway, a voice shouting, a decision made in seconds, and then silence. He inhaled sharply. Ghost pressed harder. Caleb forced the memory down. In, 2, 3, out. The pressure eased, but didn't disappear. He opened his eyes again. Focused. Present. He looked back at the journal, at the entries, at the people who had stayed here, who had kept going, even when it cost them everything. They didn't walk away, he said. Ghost's breathing remained slow and steady. Caleb turned another page. The handwriting was weaker now, more space between the lines, as if each word required effort. Second loss confirmed. Caleb froze. Second. He flipped back, counted. There it was. 2 different entries marked the same way. Did not return. But now, confirmed, not assumed, not observed from a distance. Known. Caleb's throat tightened. They buried them, he said quietly. Or at least, they knew. He turned forward again. The entries grew even shorter. Alone. The word sat on the page like a weight. Caleb stared at it. One person left. After everything, after all the losses, still here, still watching, still writing. He flipped to the next page. Storm severe, no descent. Food nearly gone. Continue observation. The repetition hit harder now. Not discipline, not structure, determination or something close to it. Caleb leaned back, his hand resting on the journal. They had every reason to stop, he said. Ghost didn't move. Caleb looked around the cabin again. The beds, 2 of them, now empty. The space between them felt wider than it should. Colder. He imagined it. 2 people here. Working. Watching. Talking in low voices. Planning. Then one gone. Then another. And the last one. Alone. Still writing. Still watching. Still helping. Caleb's chest tightened again. But this time, it wasn't panic. It was something else. Recognition. He knew what it meant to keep going after loss, to carry something forward because stopping felt worse than continuing, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. Ghost rested his head fully against Caleb's leg now. No tension, no alert, just presence. Caleb reached down, placing his hand gently on the dog's head. They chose it, he said. They could have left, but they didn't. The words felt heavy, but true. He looked back at the journal, at the last few entries, at the final lines of a story that no one had been meant to read. They paid for it, he added quietly. Ghost's ears flicked once. Caleb sat there in silence, the weight of it settling deeper. This wasn't just a place. It wasn't just a system. It was a cost. A real one. Measured in people. In time. In everything they had given. And for what people who would never know, never remember, never even realize they had been helped. Caleb looked toward the slit in the wall again. The valley below. The hikers. Still moving. Still unaware. He let out a slow breath. They didn't need to be seen, he said. But it cost them anyway. The truth of that sat heavy in the room. And for the first time, Caleb felt something shift inside him. Not just understanding, not just respect. Something deeper, something that reached into the part of him that had been empty since the war. A question. Quiet. Unspoken. But there. What do you do when you're the last one left? Ghost stayed with him. Steady, unmoving. Because whatever answer Caleb found, it wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to leave him unchanged. Caleb sat in the quiet of the third cabin, the journal open in front of him, the final pages thin beneath his fingers. The light had shifted without him noticing, late afternoon fading toward evening, the gold tones of the valley outside slipping into longer shadows. Time had moved. He hadn't. Ghost lifted his head slightly, watching the light as it dimmed through the narrow window. The dog's breathing remained steady, but there was a subtle awareness in his posture now, something that sensed the day closing. Caleb turned back to the journal. He had read the final line already. But something told him that wasn't the end. Not really. He flipped the last written page again, slower this time, letting his eyes trace every line, every mark, every hesitation in the ink. If we disappear, no one will know we tried. The words carried weight, but they didn't feel like the full truth. Caleb leaned closer. There, in the margin. Faint, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right. Another line, smaller, written with less pressure, as if the hand that wrote it had been weaker, or closer to the end. Caleb adjusted his position, angling the page toward the fading light. The words came into view, not as clear as the others, but enough. We stayed because we could not go back. Caleb's breath caught. He read it again. We stayed because we could not go back. Ghost shifted beside him, sensing the change. Caleb's mind moved quickly now, connecting what he had already seen with what this meant. They didn't just choose this, he said quietly. They had nowhere else. He flipped back through the journal, searching for confirmation, looking for the signs he hadn't fully understood before. They were there. Small references, easy to miss. Unfamiliar faces below. Avoid contact. Questions asked in valley. Changed descent route. Remain unseen. Caleb's jaw tightened. They were hiding, he said. Ghost's ears flicked. Caleb nodded to himself. But not from the mountain. He looked back at the final page. From people. The realization settled deep. Not criminals, not predators. People who couldn't return. People who had reasons to disappear. And instead of vanishing completely, they had chosen this. Watching, helping, protecting. From the shadows. Caleb leaned back slowly, the wood of the wall solid behind him. They built something out of it, he said. Something that mattered. Ghost moved closer again, pressing lightly against him. Caleb placed a hand on the dog's neck, grounding himself in the moment. His mind drifted, not to the mountain, not to the cabins, but to the past. To the mission. The one that had ended everything. He saw it clearer now. Not the chaos, not the noise the moment before. The decision. The one that changed the outcome. The one he had carried with him ever since. Caleb's breathing shortened, just slightly. But enough. Ghost reacted immediately. The dog shifted closer, pressing firmly into Caleb's side, anchoring him. Caleb closed his eyes. In, 2, 3, out. The memory loosened its grip. Not gone, but pushed back. He opened his eyes again. Focused. Present. Ghost eased the pressure slightly, but stayed close. Always close. Caleb looked back at the journal, at the people who had lived here, at the choices they had made. They didn't run from it, he said. They just lived with it. That was the difference. They had taken whatever had forced them here and turned it into something else, something useful, something that helped others, even when no one would ever know. Caleb stood slowly, the bench creaking beneath him. He walked to the window, looking out over the valley one more time. The light was fading now. The hikers below were harder to see, just faint shapes moving along the trail. Still unaware. Still safe. He understood it now. Not just what they had done, but why. They couldn't go back. So they stayed. And they made staying mean something. Caleb turned back toward the room. The beds, the table, the journal. All of it still here, still holding the story. They thought it would disappear, he said quietly. Ghost looked up at him. Caleb shook his head. It won't. The words felt different than anything he had said before. Not a promise, not yet, but close. He stepped back toward the table, closing the journal gently. His hand lingered on the cover for a moment. Then he lifted it, carried it back to the wall, to the hidden compartment. He paused there, the board still open, the space waiting. He looked at the journal again, at the weight of it, at everything inside. Then he placed it back, carefully, exactly where it had been. He slid the panel closed, sealed it, as if it had never been touched. The cabin returned to stillness, to silence, to the way it had been. But Caleb knew it wasn't the same. Not anymore. He stepped back, scanning the room one last time. Not as a stranger now. Not as someone passing through. But as someone who understood. Someone who carried part of it with him now. Ghost moved toward the door. Ready. Caleb followed. As he stepped outside, the cold air hit him again, sharper in the fading light. The mountain stretched out before him, unchanged. But he wasn't. He turned once more, looking back at the cabins. 3 structures on a ledge. Hidden, quiet, unseen, but no longer unknown. They didn't disappear, he said. Ghost stood beside him, still and steady. Caleb nodded slightly. They just needed someone to find them. The wind carried the words away, but the meaning stayed. And for the first time since he had arrived, Caleb didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like something else. Something he hadn't been in a long time. Connected. To the place. To the story. To the people who had come before him. And that connection was about to change everything. The wind eased as evening settled across the ridge, the sky fading into a cold blue that stretched endlessly above the Bitterroot Mountains. The cabins stood behind him, quiet and unchanged, as if they had already accepted his presence and his decision. Caleb didn't move right away. He stood at the edge of the ledge, Ghost beside him, both of them looking down into the valley where the last of the hikers were disappearing into shadow. Normal lives, normal endings. They would reach their cars, drive home, tell stories about the climb. They would never know how close they had come to danger, or how close they had come to being alone. Caleb exhaled slowly. They kept them safe, he said. Ghost's ears flicked once, as if acknowledging something already understood. Caleb turned away from the view and walked back toward the cabins, his movements slower now, not uncertain, but deliberate, purposeful. The first thing he did was return to the narrow trail that had brought him here. The hidden path. The one Ghost had chosen. He crouched near a section of loose rock he remembered stepping over earlier. The stones had shifted slightly, just enough to create a subtle hazard for anyone less careful. Caleb studied it for a moment, then reached down. He adjusted two of the stones, shifted one, stabilized another. Nothing obvious, nothing visible unless you knew what to look for, but safer. He stood back and looked at it again. Satisfied. Ghost watched him the entire time, silent and still. Caleb nodded slightly. Just enough, he said. He moved further along the path, scanning the terrain the way he had learned to do years ago. But this time, it wasn't about threat. It was about risk, subtle dangers, places where someone might slip, misstep, hesitate. He found another. A narrow section where the rock sloped slightly outward. He placed a small stone near the safer foothold. Not a marker anyone would question, just a suggestion. A quiet nudge. Ghost stepped closer as Caleb finished, pressing lightly against his leg. Caleb glanced down. "You see it too," he said. Ghost blinked once. Caleb straightened. They moved back toward the cabins. The light was nearly gone now, the temperature dropping, the mountain preparing for night. Caleb stepped into the first cabin again, just for a moment. He didn't touch the journal, didn't open the compartment. He didn't need to. Instead, he walked to the corner where he had set his pack earlier, opened it, pulled out a small water container, then another. He looked at them for a second, weighed the decision, then nodded to himself. He stepped outside and walked a short distance along the ledge, to a place just before the narrow approach turned dangerous. He crouched and placed the containers there, tucked them slightly behind a natural rock formation. Hidden, but findable, if someone needed it, if someone was paying attention. Caleb stood, stepping back, looking at the placement. Not perfect, but enough. He exhaled. Ghost came to stand beside him again. "You ready?" Caleb asked quietly. Ghost's tail gave a small, controlled movement. "Yes." Caleb turned toward the descent path. The long way down. Back to the world he had left behind. But he didn't take the first step right away. He looked back once more. At the cabins, at the ledge, at the place that had changed something inside him he hadn't expected to change. They didn't leave, he said. Ghost remained still beside him. Caleb nodded. "So neither will I. Not like them. Not completely. But enough. In the ways that mattered." He adjusted the straps on his pack, the familiar motion grounding him. Then he started down. The descent was slower, careful, measured. Not just because of the terrain, but because of the shift inside him. Every step now carried something more than weight. It carried purpose. Ghost moved ahead, guiding when needed, pausing when the ground changed, always aware, always watching. Halfway down, the wind picked up again, rushing through the trees below, carrying the faint sound of movement. Voices. Distant. Hikers. Caleb paused on a ridge and looked down. Two figures moved along the trail, their headlamps just beginning to glow in the fading light. One of them slipped slightly, caught themselves, laughed, kept going. Caleb watched them for a moment, then nodded. "They'll be fine," he said. Ghost stood quietly beside him, and for the first time, Caleb believed it. Because now, he understood what it meant to watch. Not for control, not for fear, but for something quieter, something that didn't need to be seen. They continued down until the cabins disappeared from view, until the ledge became just another shadow in the mountain, until the world below began to feel closer, more real. But something stayed with him. Not the weight, not the loss, but the choice. The same one those people had made. To care, without being asked, without being known. By the time Caleb reached the lower trail, night had settled fully. The stars were sharp overhead, the air colder. Still. He stopped once more, turning back toward the darkness where the cabins stood unseen. Ghost sat beside him, calm and steady. Caleb took a slow breath. In, 2, 3, out. No panic, no memory pulling him under. Just quiet, just control, just presence. He looked at Ghost. A faint smile touched his face. "For the first time since the war," he said softly. Ghost tilted his head slightly. Caleb nodded. "I've got a mission again." Ghost stood. Ready. Caleb turned forward. And together, they walked into the dark. Not alone, not lost, and no longer just surviving. Type 1 if you believe doing the right thing matters, even when no one sees it. Or 0 if you think it's easier to walk away. Every choice we make leaves something behind, out here, that still means something. If stories like this speak to you, go ahead and subscribe. There's more waiting just up the trail.